All right. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Solution for Future Flooding in the Charles River Watershed. We're really excited to have you all here joining us. And since it is 7:01, I am going to get started and move on to our first intro slides, which is mostly logistics. So before we dive into our topic, I want to share that for tonight's webinar, you do have the option to listen to the webinar in Spanish and English. If you are on your phone to choose your language, you can click the more icon at the bottom of your Zoom app, which is represented by the three dots. And then within that, you'll be able to find the language interpretation option symbolized by globe. And once you click that, you will see an option to select for Spanish. And if you're on the computer, you should be able to see the language interpretation option right at the bottom of the Zoom, also symbolized by the globe icon. And even if you are listening in English, we do suggest that you select the English language option as well. And with that, I'd like to also remind our speakers tonight to just go a little bit slower, but I'll also now pass it off to our Spanish interpreter, Emily, to give the instructions in Spanish.
Thank you. Buenas noches a todos. Mi nombre es Emily y voy a proporcionar servicios de interpretación que tenemos para la presentación esta noche. En un momentico vamos a encender la función de interpretación. Entonces, ubicándose a la parte inferior de su ventana de Zoom y haciendo clic en el icono del globo, se va a conectar con la función de interpretación. Por favor, escoge un idioma o el español o inglés para escuchar. Si se está conectando con móvil, empuje los tres puntitos. De ahí puede empujar more o más y se va a conectar con la función de interpretación así. También, por favor, escogiendo o el inglés o el español. Y si tiene cualquier dificultad, por favor, déjanos saber en el chat. Muchas gracias y disfruta la presentación. Thank you.
All right, and I will now open the Spanish. Let's see. Okay. Sorry. Ryan, do you mind setting the interpretation channel by clicking the globe icon and setting it to start?
The globe icon has not showed up on my end.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. Give me 1 second.
So while we're working out the technical aspects of the interpretation channel, just to answer the question, you will not see the globe icon until the interpretation function has been turned on. So just wait for that and it should be on in just a moment. Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that, Emily.
Entonces ya estamos arreglando la tecnología del canal de interpretación y verá solamente el icono del globo después que encendemos la función en un momentico. Gracias por su paciencia.
All right, I figured it out. I just had to stop screen sharing. So now you should be able to see the icon, and then I will screen share again so that we can get back on track. All right. Can you guys still see my screen? Yes, perfect. All right. And as a reminder for our audience, we are in webinar mode, meaning that you will only be able to see the host and panelists, and the chat function is also set that you can chat with the host and panelists if you have any technical issues or questions. So for tonight, we will be starting with introductions, then moving on to project background, results from our projects, hear from our municipal perspective about the benefits of this project at the local level, a summary of outreach engagements for the past 6 or so months, what's next for us in this project, and then at the end, we will have a Q&A with the audience. We will also have 3 poll questions tonight, which will pop up on your screen. If you are unable to answer the polls for whatever reason, feel free to answer in the chat, which our panel will still be able to see. All right, so my name is Dira Johanneff, and I'm with the Charles River Watershed Association. If you haven't heard of us before, we are one of the oldest watershed organizations in the country, founded in 1965 by a group of residents who were concerned with the state of the Charles River. We currently work with different federal and state agencies, as well as with the watershed municipalities on various projects and advocacy efforts. And while we have come a long way since the days of the song Dirty Water, we still have a long way to go with a changing climate and how that will impact our watershed. Our mission today is to protect, restore, and enhance the Charles River and its watershed through science, advocacy, and the law. And if you're wondering what a watershed is, it's any area of land where when rain or snow falls on this area of land, that water will drain into one common body of water, which in our case, that's the Charles River. And the river itself, if you're not familiar, is actually 80 miles long, and it starts all the way in Hopkinton before making its way down towards the Boston Harbor. There are 35 towns and cities that are part of the watershed, and we have approximately 1 million residents living across the entire 308 square miles. It's also important to note that over 60% of the watershed population lives in environmental justice or EJ neighborhoods in our watershed, and that's really important as we think about how we prioritize implementation of climate resilience projects. And as we talk about our watershed, I do want to take a moment for a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the Charles River watershed resides on occupied territory of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag tribes. We acknowledge that a land acknowledgement is not enough, and we continue to learn, grow, and listen to Native voices as we advocate for a resilient future. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for the night. Our first speaker will be Julie Wood, who is the Climate Resilience Director at Charles River Watershed Association. Julie has been a member of CRWA since joining the organization in 2007. She currently manages the Charles River Climate Compact, a voluntary partnership of cities and towns in the Charles River watershed, and serves as the project manager for the Charles River Flood Model project that you'll be hearing about tonight. Julie has a BA in mathematics from Boston College and a master's in environmental science from UMass Boston. Our second speaker is Claire Rondelli, who currently serves as the conservation agent and open space planner for the town of Natick, after spending 4 years in the conservation office for the city of Newton. She dedicates her time to educating residents of Natick about wetlands, stormwater, invasive species, and all things environmental, and has greatly enjoyed being a municipal representative in the CRWA Climate Compact while working in both cities. She has worked on several climate plans and projects in both communities and is a certified sustainability professional through the Institute of Sustainable Infrastructure. Claire got her bachelor's in environmental science from Northeastern University. And you all have already met me. I'm Dira Johanneff, again, Senior Climate Resilience Associate with Charles River Watershed Association. And if you come to these webinars in the past, you'll notice that I typically only do introductions to these webinars, but and our project partners from communities responding to extreme weather, or CREW, typically speaks on our engagement work. But today I will be filling that in as I do also work directly to support that part of our project and also other regional climate resiliency projects with Julie. And with that, I will pass it off to Julie.
Thank you so much, Dira. Yes, thank you for pulling triple duty with moderating, figuring out those technical details, and also presenting. One of our team members is taking a well-deserved vacation somewhere warm. So Dira's will be our final speaker of the night. Thanks to those of you who are joining us this evening on this very, very cold evening. Thanks to my colleague Claire and new colleague to CRWA, Ryan, for filling in with some back-end support tonight. And gracias a Emily, our Spanish interpreter. As the name of this webinar implies, we are going to be talking about flooding, but I just want to take a minute to define that a little bit. Seems obvious. Maybe we all think we know what flooding is, but simply stated, flooding is just too much water in the same place at the same time. So we essentially have a few ways to take that on. We can spread the water out so that it's not all in the same place, or we can slow the water down so it's not all getting to the same place at the same time. And then I also want to draw a distinction between flooding and flooding impacts. Because flooding is a natural occurrence, rivers have floodplains because rivers flood. Wet periods and dry periods are part of the natural cycle. Flooding impacts, however, are what we see in these pictures when we have too much water in the same place at the same time. And that's also where our human life is, our human infrastructure. So whether it's cars, whether it's roads, all these pictures are taken from the last 6 months right here in the watershed. This top header here is a state webpage that the state has dedicated solely to flooding recovery for last year. So it's definitely something we're experiencing more and more, something we're hearing about more and more, and something we're seeing in our daily lives more and more. Next slide. Why? Climate change is pretty much the straightforward answer. In the Northeast, we are projected to get wetter weather overall. However, how that wet weather is coming is more intense storms. So while we may have less rainy days in a year, those rainy days we do have, we are getting a lot of rain. And just in the last month and a half, we've all seen that. These consolidated, 12, 24, 36-hour periods where we're getting multi-inches of rain. So this graphic here shows something we call design storms, which is just a size of a rain event falling over some period of time that's used to build our infrastructure. We need to build a pipe. We need to build a bridge. How much water is it going to carry? How much water should fit under it? So for those techniques, we use design storms. And what we're finding is that the design storms of the past, or the storms of the past, will not be the storms of the future. These storms are getting bigger. The bigger storms are coming more frequently. So this is just an image that shows the different storms that we've used in our project that I'm going to talk about tonight. But as you can see, what is a 100-year storm of today, a storm that might occur every 100 years, is going to be a 25-year storm of the future. So a storm that might occur every 25 years. Next slide. In 2019, Charles River Watershed Association founded the Charles River Climate Compact. We brought together our cities and towns because climate change and climate impacts do not respect municipal boundaries. Flooding is a prime example of that. What happens upstream is going to flow downstream. And if a lot of water is coming from upstream, we're going to have downstream flooding. So we knew we needed to get together and have a conversation about this. What we didn't know at the time was how welcome this conversation would be, how engaged our municipal partners would be. So it's really blossomed. We've grown and done a lot since 2019, some of which I'll catch you up on or give you resources to find out more about. But the Climate Compact is city and town officials that came together and said, yes, we need to collaborate on climate adaptation. We need to talk to each other about what we're doing, learn from each other, and partner on some group planning projects, especially with flooding, where the watershed is the necessary definition of the geography where the flooding will occur. Next slide. So that led us to this Charles River Flood Model project, which has been going on since about 2020, so about 3 years now. We have developed a computer model that allows us to simulate flooding across the watershed under different storm events. So they can be those design storms, those theoretical storms I was talking about, or they can be actual storms that have occurred in the past. Our project team is the Climate Compact, communities responding to extreme weather, which helps out with the community engagement and outreach, us at CRWA, and then our technical partner at Weston and Sampson. This year we have 20 municipalities participating as active participants, so hopefully you see your city or town's name on that list. And by working across the watershed, we're also able to better identify and implement solutions equitably. So where do the resources need to go? Where is the targeted approach going to benefit the most people, and specifically those that are most vulnerable to climate change? Next slide. So I referenced that taking a watershed approach is necessary when you're working on flooding. If you're only looking at one part of the watershed, you really limit the tools in your toolbox. So by looking at the full watershed, we open our toolbox up to all the available tools. When you're looking at an upstream area, you might have opportunities to store and hold water. That's going to help with that timing issue of flooding. Maybe you'll have more space to spread out some of that water. In the middle part of the watershed, you can look for a combination of storing and conveying the water, moving some water through quickly so it doesn't damage surrounding properties, other water storing safely in a wetland area. Again, spread out the timing issue. If you're only looking downstream, that's where your toolbox gets really quite limited because the water is going to arrive. So once you're downstream, really you're just trying to get the water out as quickly as possible, or retreat from the flooding, or protect your critical infrastructure and infrastructure from the flooding. So by looking at the watershed scale, we can look at all of these potential tools, and we can also look at them in combination with one another. Next slide. So I mentioned the project's been going on for a few years. Some of our major accomplishments: by developing the model, we've been able to run various scenarios, including multiple future rain events, multiple potential flood mitigation actions, and see the impacts of those. I'm going to walk through a few of those tonight. And we've also been able to look at some site-specific flood mitigation projects, which is what Claire will be talking about, one in her community. All of the results are available online. We have a flood mitigation implementation plan we've published, also available online. And then a lot of site-specific opportunities, some of which are already moving forward. We've also done many outreach and engagement events like this one, spoken at a variety of different formats, local, state, regional, and as well as national conferences. Next slide. If you want to learn more about what we've done in the past, check out some of our past webinars on our website. We can share these links in the chat. Thank you, Ryan. Next slide. Of impacts, we will see an increase in runoff, significant increase in runoff, and significant acreage, more than 2,600 acres potentially flooded that currently does not experience flooding. Some of these acres include critical facilities, hospitals, schools, highways. So even if you're not flooded, you have the potential to be impacted, or your neighbors do as well. Next slide. All right, so now I want to get into what is happening now and kind of preview some of the stuff that's coming in the next few months. So one of our big efforts we've been working on lately is to do some on-the-ground assessments. These have been focused on culverts and to some extent bridges. These are areas where our streams interface with our human infrastructure, road crossings, railroad crossing, things like that. So we've been going out into the field, seeing the actual real world conditions. We do this for two reasons. One, we can take this data and put it into our model, get better results. And two, we can see if these are potentially causing barriers to wildlife passage, and then potentially have those restored as when future funding becomes available. So we've been to over 200 in just the last year, really, a little more than a year. So hopefully some of those are in your community, and those are getting into the added into the model. Next slide. All of this will lead into some model updates. So we're doing some back-end technical updates to the model. That could be its own full webinar, but I'll just say it's going to lead to improved accuracy and expanded extent of the results. So look for those coming in the next few months. This image here shows you what you'll see if you go online to the online results viewer. And this dark blue is deeper flooding. So you can see, this view, it kind of looks like, oh, there's some really bad flooding, and then all of a sudden it stops just at this line. So that's the kind of thing that the new updated model will address. It won't have these, super sharp barriers to this deep flooding. It'll hopefully show it tapering off a little bit more accurately. Next slide. Okay, so what have we learned from the potential mitigation scenarios we've run? I'm going to walk through these just to make sure we're all on the same page. I know not everyone loves a chart, but hopefully my chart people are happy to see this. So one of the scenarios we looked at was, what if we used green stormwater infrastructure to store a 2070 2-year storm, 4.5 inches of rain event, a 4.5-inch rain event. So that's one of these design storms I was talking about. And we stored that from runoff from 50% of all the impervious cover. So that's a pretty big storm, and that's a lot of impervious cover that we're capturing the runoff from. However, over on our chart here on the right side of the slide, the green bar shows current 10-year storm. This is about how much runoff we would see from a current 10-year storm. The darker teal line there shows the 2070 10-year storm. So it's a big jump. That's that big jump in runoff I was referring to earlier. Then the bright blue line shows the reduction in flooding by capturing all that runoff, capturing that 2-year storm event from 50% of the runoff. So you can see it's an improvement. We runoff, but it is not even getting us down to current day conditions. It is a far way from current day conditions. So not sharing this just to depress folks, but that's the reality. The reality is it's going to take a lot to address this flooding in a meaningful way. Next slide. This one shows that, yes, we can make things better. We can also make things worse. So this shows what would happen if we let some of our currently undeveloped land get developed. So changing maybe a forest into a shopping center with a large parking lot. So changing that undeveloped land into impervious cover. There will be significant impacts downstream. This is another reason it's so important to look at this at the watershed scale. One community could make a decision to develop a large undeveloped area, And where would the flooding consequences be? Potentially in another downstream community. And we don't always have those conversations in Massachusetts. In fact, we rarely have those conversations across communities. Next slide. We're also now getting more into matching solutions with communities or land use types or sub-watersheds, if you want to get really technical. What we found from our previous work is that some of the strategies we've tested out work better in some communities than others. And so now that we have that base understanding, it allows us to target strategies to where they work best. And next slide, I think, has an example. Ooh, back one. Yeah, so this is just an example. The green stormwater infrastructure scenario worked really well in Lexington, not as well in Medfield. What did work in Medfield? That upstream storage, using ponds to actually hold water, slow it down, wait until the rain is over, then you release the water. So we're getting more into a targeted location approach. Next slide. And then I briefly mentioned that we have also found site-specific projects. This allows us to start doing things because it's a large job, as our previous results have emphasized. It's going to take a lot of effort to get us where we need to be. So we want to find things we can start doing now. So Claire's going to talk a little about the Natick project. The other ones, there's info on our website if you want to get into it. We have this handout that if you want to get into any of the other ones, and we have this handout to share, and we have past webinars on all of the sites as well. But exciting update. Next slide. We have gotten additional funding to move forward with the projects in Waltham and Newton. So if you're in those communities and want to be kept up to date, make sure you are on our river current list, and there's an opportunity to sign up for that at the end. Next slide. Just zooming in on the Newton project, something to highlight is that a lot of this flooding is occurring in areas that were once wetlands. So some of this, of course, well, a lot of it, of course, it's not only the change in climate, it's how we've developed our landscape and how we've changed our landscape. So this is a map from 1893 showing a nice little wetland area there, which now has been a straightened brook and turned into a field. And unsurprisingly, there is flooding there, and it is getting worse as our climate changes. Next slide. So current and future work, please stay in touch. We'll have more site-specific community input meetings on additional site-specific designs we're identifying now. Again, at the end, screen will pop up so you can make sure you're on our mailing list. We're going to be updating our flood reduction plan, and we'll be doing more outreach in the spring. We are open to invitations. If your community has a great event, fun event, we love fun events, please reach out to us. We'd love to come and table or talk about the project. And with that, I'll turn it over to Claire to talk a little bit more about the priority project in Natick.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, everyone, for coming in tonight. Natick has been really honored to be the fiscal lead on the flood model project for the last 3 years. It is really such an amazing project for each of the municipalities that's a part of it, developing support materials for grant applications, helping our public works departments understand how flooding might impact our community better, and being able to prioritize work like culvert replacements and enlargements to help mitigate some of that flooding. During the site-specific selection during the last cycle of the flood model, Natick High School was chosen as a concept design location for some flood mitigation strategies. And something that we've really dialed in on is the suggestion for a treatment wetland to be constructed adjacent to an existing pond system in the footprint or in the partial footprint of a utility maintenance yard. So this utility yard services one very small building, but the amount of gravel parking that is provided is way larger than what is necessary. So the town has actually moved forward with an expression of interest for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, the same program that funds this project, to see if we can advance some additional funding to do full design and permitting support for this solution. The town is really impressed with the concept that was provided and the potential benefits that can come out of the project. We also recently just installed a tiny forest at the Natick High School. And with the building being LEED certified, a solar canopy over the parking lots, we're really hoping that this area can become not only a great place for education about resiliency in our climate, but also a really great sort of just example of what the appropriate scientific support can do for advancing these projects. So hopefully, if you attend a similar webinar like this next year, we'll have some really great designs developed for a potential treatment wetland here. And I did see a question pop up in the chat. It's going to be a little bit larger than a rain garden. It's truly going to be a constructed wetland. This small settling pond is actually the outfall location for the majority of the runoff that's generated in Natick Center. So a really great opportunity to not only provide additional flood capacity, but also get some water quality treatment as well. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Dira for talk about some community engagement.
Thanks, Claire and Julie. And with that, we're gonna slightly switch over to what we've been doing to engage watershed communities. As I was saying earlier, I will be speaking behalf of our project partner from communities responding to extreme weather, or CREW. So you'll notice that the slides do have their logos on there. But before I begin my slides, I think this is a great time to launch a few of our polls that we've set up based on Julie and Claire's slides on priority projects in the watershed and impacts of those projects at the community level. All right, so let me make sure I can successfully do this. The first poll question is going to be asking, how would you prioritize on the ground flood mitigations in your project, in your communities? Some examples that we put in there that you could vote on is, do you prioritize projects that have the ability to build really quickly, or prioritize projects that will protect downstream properties, ability to protect EJ neighborhoods, or protect critical facilities, recreational opportunities, add habitat and connectivity, or should it be something that is accessible to a large number of people? So I'll give folks about a minute or so to answer, and then I'll share with the group some of the results after everyone or most folks have voted. And since I can see in real time, I can actually say that there is a lot of votes for projects that will provide habitat and connectivity. Lots of votes for projects that will protect downstream communities, protect our critical facilities like our police, fire, schools, emergency shelters. All right, great. Okay, I see some folks are still plugging in their answers, so I'll give it maybe 20 more seconds. All right, I am going to end the poll, and then I'm going to share the results. Hopefully everyone can see that, but if not, I'll just share out loud that we have a lot of votes again for habitat and connectivity. Seems to be getting first place. And then the second poll before I go into my slides. Oops. A lot of buttons when you're doing multiple things at once. Let's see. My other poll. Oh, here we go. second poll for the night is, what is most important to you in regards to flood mitigation projects? What are the most important impacts of a flood mitigation project? Is it to also prevent flooding of buildings, flooding of roadways, major roadways? It's a little similar to the previous questions, but there are some other, I think, questions in there. And I'll give folks about a minute or so to also answer the question. All right, I see answers coming in, and number one that I can see right now that people are prioritizing is, again, preventing flooding of critical infrastructure. Let's see, and critical infrastructure, that's our hospitals and schools, as well as prevent flooding of infrastructure such as our roads, buildings and parking lots. All right, great. I'm gonna end the poll and then I'm gonna share the results so you guys can also see the results of what's most popular, but it looks like there's a good spread of important things to different folks. All right, with that, I will get into what we've been doing with Crew in terms of our community engagement. But before that, I'll do a quick overview of who exactly is Crew. So Crew, our partners from Crew have been working with us since 2021. They're a network of local leaders building grassroots climate resilience through inclusive and hands-on education, service, and planning. A major part of their work is to also help communities prepare for and respond to local extreme weather impacts, including creating climate resiliency hubs across the nation. And you can find more information about Crew on their website, which Ryan has put a link in the chat. And for this project, Crew's primary focus was to help us share our flood model details, updates, and resources through education of nature-based solutions and green infrastructure, and how can residents prepare for flooding through meaningful reach and empowering watershed residents who are most vulnerable to flooding impacts. And in Crew's perspective, they really define meaningful reach and empowerment based on how the communities we work with define it. So whether that's through in-person presentation, maybe a smaller discussion, maybe we're joining them in their scheduled meetings, having translators, doing it in various different ways. And we've been raising awareness with watershed residents through tabling events at large community events like Medway Pride Day, Nature in the City events in Cambridge, and also using creative methods such as creating a climate preparedness scavenger hunt, using interactive posters and voting jars to have people vote on their favorite nature-based solutions. We've also hosted workshops to target engagement with climate vulnerable and EJ communities. And all of this has been paired with providing folks with extreme weather resources that Crew brings, including emergency blankets that people can take and bring home and keep it in their cars or in their house. We've also learned that creating tactile methods for engagement can really pull people in. So we've created a poster asking what nature-based solutions people want to see in their communities, and then they get to vote using stickers like the image that you see in the bottom right. And since we're not in person today, you won't be able to vote using a sticker. So we will just do a Zoom poll instead. And I promise you, this is the last Zoom poll for the night. And this is specifically asking about what your favorite nature-based solutions you would like to see in your community. Some examples in there is wetland restoration, land conservation, maybe having less paved surfaces in your community, maybe dam removal. One of my favorite solutions, green stormwater infrastructure. So that includes rain gardens, tree trenches, bioswales. Maybe we should have less development in flood-prone areas. We got a lot of vote for increasing tree canopy while we were out doing community engagement. If you have any other thoughts, definitely feel free to share in the chat, maybe some innovative ideas that we haven't, or maybe ideas that are happening in your community that we should know about. And maybe I'll give it about 30 more seconds for folks to answer. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. And then I'll share the results, which looks like a lot of voting for wetland restoration, less impervious surfaces, a lot of votes for green stormwater infrastructure, as well as increasing tree canopy. Great. All right. And you might be wondering where does all of our engagement results go to? Where do the thoughts and feedbacks that folks share with us go to towards this project? As Julie mentioned, we're a couple years into our project, and previous community engagement has helped us prioritize what to model in the flood model. For example, as we were deciding what to model as a watershed, as watershed solutions, the public raised wetland restoration as a priority, which the project team didn't initially have as a top priority. But because there was so much support for it from the public, we did end up modeling that on the Charles River flood model. Another example is our Hardy Pond project, which that project or opportunity was actually ID'd by the community members over a decade ago as a site to do a climate resiliency project. And thankfully now it's part of the flood model. It's a project that has received funding from the state to do wetland restoration, green stormwater infrastructure, as well as improving the pond outlet to potentially allow for more flood storage in the pond prior to a big storm event. And like Julie mentioned, if you have a local project that you think we should know about happening in your community, we love getting recommendations from the community on what to prioritize, opportunities we should think about. So if you do have those, feel free to add them in the chat or the Q&A box. And since last July, we've done a lot of community engagement events. We've attended 5, tabling events. We have hosted 2 workshops with environmental justice communities. We recently hosted 1 community focus group. And in all of these, we've shared the flood model results and asked folks to share their concerns about climate change and then also vote for their favorite nature-based solutions. And we've had a total of 244 people voting while we're out and about talking about these different types of solutions. And we've seen that some of the top choices include increased tree canopy, having floodable parks, creating more urban green spaces and reducing what impermeable surfaces we currently do have. And what are we looking forward to? So as we continue our project with crew, Lee, who is our crew staff member, will be helping us to continue our engagement by attending community events like Earth Day events, Celebrate Milford Day. We have upcoming workshops with senior residents in our watershed, where we will continue to share project updates and engage in dialogue with seniors about preparedness. And this has been in partnership with municipal staff and local community groups co-presenting with us, which has been super great. And we also have new partnerships lined up for more events. Again, if you have community events that we can attend and share the flood model work to engage and educate about flooding impacts, please let us know. And if you have any interest in working with Crew and their team, you can email Lee Munier, who obviously isn't here, but she is the program manager at Crew and has been leading the work with us. And her email is on the screen, but I think Ryan will be able to put it in the chat as well. And with that, we can lead into our Q&A or session. If you have not already, please add your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be able to look through them. And for audiences listening in Spanish, feel free to also include your questions in Spanish in the Q&A, and then I might be able to do a quick online translation to share with the panel. All right, let me pin all of our speakers so you can see everyone. I don't see any current Q&A. I did see a question earlier, and let me make sure I can get to that. Okay, question in the chat, I think for Julie. Have you modeled impact of significant removal of impervious surfaces?
Yes, great question. That is one of the scenarios we've looked at in the past, along with the one I showed tonight, the green infrastructure storage. Impervious cover reduction was the other most effective scenario. It was actually what we in our scenario was a little less effective than the green infrastructure scenario I shared, which is why I shared that one tonight. But it was effective. So definitely, again, one of the tools in the toolbox to be used in combination with other things. It's also one of the solutions we're going to be carrying into that more geographically targeted approach. So probably makes sense. There are, sub-basin, sub-watershed, neighborhoods where obviously that would make a big difference, as opposed to, where it isn't going to make quite as big a difference. And when we do look at these scenarios across the full study area, which is about almost 300 square miles, a little less than 300 square miles, looking for results across that large area, sometimes the impacts, can seem small across that large area. But in specific communities, specific neighborhoods, it can have a huge difference. And it can, protect critical infrastructure, protect homes and businesses in certain areas. So yeah, that's a key strategy that we're looking at.
Great, thanks, Julie. And then I see a question in the Q&A from Barbara. How can we control what our city does to understand how important it is to maintain open space? And I think she added some additional info about Waltham's new high school, where the city had to utilize blasting rocks to I think build the new high school, which has impacts on the streams and wetlands. So maybe this question for Claire, speaking as a municipal representative, how can residents in their own communities engage with the city to share their thoughts and concerns and what they prioritize in terms of climate resiliency?
Yeah, of course. So it is definitely going to vary from community to community, but I think if you live in a city, finding out who your city councilors are, writing them and engaging with them to make clear what the priorities are, electing new city councilors that have similar priorities for the things that you care about. If you live in a town, I would certainly recommend reaching out to people like your local conservation agent, local departments of public works, local planning departments, to see maybe what they're doing in regards to open space management and other types of resiliency work. if your town has a sustainability director. And that way you can, encourage or even, gather your fellow residents together and bring forward a citizen petition for a town meeting warrant article. If you live in a community that has a Community Preservation Act adopted, you can work with your city or town to get CPA funds to help acquire and protect additional open space. And I do want to say I didn't know specifically about the Waltham project, but one of the unfortunate realities of being a municipal worker is that there is a balancing act that needs to be done. And I think it's important that sustainability and resilience are incorporated into all projects. So I would encourage you to reach out to the Waltham town administration or city council and see what sustainability was incorporated into the project. Did they do LEED certified for their building? Do they have on-site stormwater management that promotes infiltration? To see if there was, still that incorporation of resiliency, understanding that sometimes we have no choice but to build things in less than ideal locations.
Yeah, those are all great, Claire. If I can add quickly to that, I'll just say, Massachusetts is, I think, a bit unique in the fact that so many decisions, especially development decisions, really are at the municipal level, which can make things hard, when you're trying to think in a regional context. But can also be nice, for citizen involvement. I mean, I think Claire, just off the top of her head, had so many suggestions for how you can interact. However, we have noticed that a lot of these, policies, bylaws, regulations that govern these development decisions haven't necessarily caught up to climate change. And I don't think we're unique in that at all. Our region of the state or our state at all. That's a problem with state regulations. It's a problem with other states' regulations. It's a problem with federal regulations. So there's still some catch up to do. So that's just one other thing I would also encourage residents to think about. And one thing that CRWA has been also trying to push forward is, where can we find, great example of local regulations that really kind of take this into account, make some of these things more business as usual, because the reality is sometimes the municipality's hands could be tied, if they just don't have the authority to kind of control for these future conditions. There's only, so much that can happen. So that's another piece to push advocacy on.
Great, thank you. And I think this next question is somewhat related. Someone in the chat asking that it would be very helpful to have information about how communities can address affordable housing goals and flood mitigation goals and EJ goals most effectively, as a lot of the times they seem like they are in conflict, whether that's, in terms of priorities or funding or even space. So having good examples of that, of where projects meet multiple goals would be great. And for me to answer that quickly, I think that's a concern for every municipality, every, state across the US. How do you balance all of that, like Claire was saying? But I wonder, Julie, if you could speak a little bit about maybe how the flood model would be useful, and maybe how other organizations who are interested in looking at our flood model for work that they're doing.
Yes, one of the basic drivers behind starting this project was just to be able to provide good data on where and when flooding will occur as a result of climate change for local decision makers. So without this data, you are just making, or one is just making all development decisions in a vacuum. You just, essentially are guessing. And so I think one pretty basic piece of that is, if we need new housing, and we need new affordable housing, that's an absolute truth. We don't want new housing and new affordable housing in areas where it's going to flood. So having this data can help with that just very basic piece. So, you know, is it more density in areas that aren't going to flood? Is it, you know, maybe there's some opportunities for some more potential upland development, but at least you have, you know, this basic information of ideally keeping housing out of flooding areas. Space constraints are a real challenge for us in our watershed because it takes space to store water. If those of you that come from the energy world and the energy storage, I know that has its own challenges, but it's very different. Water takes up a lot of space, so having space to store it. So yes, I agree they can be seen in conflict for sure, but you know, having tools like this and having forums like this to bring together those discussions and hopefully try and be able to put those pieces together is essentially what we're trying to do. Obviously, all the cities, or many of our cities and towns, are right now in the very real process of doing planning around the MBTA Community Housing Act. Probably getting the name wrong, but increasing their density around the MBTA stops. Whether it's, you know, the near-term deadlines for some of our communities, some have a little longer. And so while folks are making those plans, we have been encouraging them to please use this data, please consider this data, so that, you know, again, where you are looking at increasing density is not going to put more people in harm's way. And so we need to do both. I don't think there's again, I think one other thing we've learned from our work, there's no silver bullet here. There's no silver bullet. We need to do what we can almost everywhere we can. So, you know, if it's an upland area where maybe there's an opportunity to provide more housing and it is actually going to be new construction, what can we do for stormwater management and flood mitigation on that site? So where can we look for opportunities everywhere? But yeah, good. I think good phrase that Claire kicked us off with, balancing act, because there's definitely no, you know, one size fits all or one answer for every location.
Thanks, Julie. And then I see another pretty good question in the chat, you know, related to types of nature-based solutions and how upland storage can help reduce flooding impacts. A question about who controls the Upper Charles Natural Valley storage area to control flow that affects communities downriver, and how is the temporary storage capacity regulated in the Natural Valley storage area, which, if folks don't know, and I'm sure Julie will expand, is a network of wetlands, protected wetlands that we have in the Charles River upper and middle watershed, which does that work of helping to store floodwaters.
Yes, yeah, the Natural Valley storage area was put in place by the Army Corps of Engineers. And it's still one of the very few examples of an Army Corps of Engineers projects that uses nature-based solutions. Who controls it now? It's about 8,000, I think 8,300 acres of wetlands. They're not all in one location. They're non-contiguous. They're spread out in the middle and upper watershed. Some are still owned by the Army Corps. Others were transferred to local communities or have, you know, some sort of protection in place. That means they can never be developed. So they are there to soak up water, store that water, and then release it more slowly. Again, spread out that timing piece, let the water flow down more slowly so it's not all coming to the downstream area at once. There's very little control, though. It's really a passive system as far as how the wetland storage goes. So it just soaks into the wetlands and then bleeds out. The active control parts of the flood control system for the Charles River that were put in place at the same time, also by the Army Corps, are a few dams. So the new Charles River Dam, which is the barrier between the harbor and the river, that has very active flood control. In advance of a storm, the DCR who operates the dam can pump water out of the lower Charles. You know, it's like letting water out of the bathtub. You have more room to fill it up. So that's the most active. There's also some flashboards at the Moody Street Dam in Waltham. Not quite as active, but they do also let, again, DCR control to some extent the level of water behind the dam and downstream of the dam. So the wetland part is just passive, and then those two dams do have some active control. In the storage capacity, it makes a big difference. So if you compare sort of how quickly the peak of the river flow will appear downstream in Boston and Cambridge after a big storm, between our river and the Mystic River, for example. Yes, our watershed is bigger. It has longer to go, but it is also much less flashy. So in the Mystic, where they do not have this wonderful preserved set of wetlands, really the water just does scream down into Boston, and that peak will hit really quickly after the rain. And in the Charles, it is much more spread out. So it's a very effective strategy, and definitely one we are looking to expand on and replicate across the watershed.
Great, thanks, Julie. And then I see one other question in the Q&A about how can we package this information for the cities and towns to understand what they do has a long-term negative impact. And I wonder, Julie, if you could speak on how the partnership works for the Climate Compact and who's involved, and then maybe Claire, an example of how you know, as a municipality, utilize the flood model itself too. Maybe Julie first, yeah.
Sure, yeah. No, it's tricky. We're not wired for weighing long-term consequences just as humans. I think that's one of the reasons working in climate and climate mitigation. One of the many reasons working on climate and climate mitigation, you know, is challenging. And so it's, you know, as Claire said, there's so, you know, municipalities are balancing so many things and dealing with so many pressures. It can be really hard. And again, prior to having the model, without good data on what was happening, you know, that was just kind of exacerbating that problem. So yeah, in the compact, we come together, we, you know, do these get together to kind of select the model runs that are most useful for decision makers. We're going to add a few after we've done our update. We're going to add probably most of the storms we've looked at are 24-hour storms. So we're going to add some longer storms or some of these back-to-back storms. I mean, even just this week, Saturday night, you know, insane rain. 2 days later, you know, snow, sleet, rain, snow melts. So it's pretty crazy. So we're going to add some new events, just add to that data. And then we're also going to add some new mitigation strategies. And all of our modeling, as you saw, you know, does have results out to 2070 to try and build that thinking in to planning. But, you know, I'll go back to what I said before. It also really does need to be built into our local bylaws and local regulations. And it is so great if residents reach out to their elected officials, and you don't have to have all the answers, but just, you know, promoting that, asking those questions. We do have a lot of resources on our website around that. We have what's called our Climate Resilience 101 Toolkit. You know, it has examples from communities that have started to incorporate climate change into their local regulations and bylaws. Because once it's in there, it will, you know, it will kind of come into play in that conversation in a very real way. Pass it to you, Claire.
Oh, yep, just to weigh in. So the town of Natick uses the flood model in a number of different ways. As I mentioned, we use the data and the conceptual design for the high school as support for a grant funding application. We use the flood model as a tool to help us assess a dam removal project that we're currently doing in Natick. It is not a flood storage dam, so it has a little bit less of an impact, but it is really helpful for the associated park redesign project that we're doing in conjunction with the spillway removal, and being able to design our parks to be able to withstand future flooding that's predicted for the area. And we also use the flood model to help us assess areas where culverts for replacement can be prioritized. The Division of Ecological Restoration has a culvert replacement grant that they issue every year. And the town has been really focused on, I think, as highlighted by the amount of street flooding we've had this year due to rain, where there are really large deficiencies in our storm drain system that can be improved through pretty minor efforts like culvert replacement. I also think that the compact itself is a really great tool for the communities that are a part of it, because it is a great opportunity to hear what our neighboring communities are doing and help reflect that in our own communities. So Barbara, I would maybe reach out to your community, see if there is a liaison that's part of the compact from your community, and maybe discuss with them some things that you feel like are a priority in your community. So that way it can be reflected back to the larger model. I know Natick was working and successfully updated their stormwater bylaw in the last year to be more climate resilient and use better rainfall data. And we're actively working to update our wetlands bylaw as well to help incorporate some of that resiliency as well.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat or the Q&A, and it is 8:07, so we started our Q&A a little early, so I'm actually gonna head on over to our last slide, which is a thank you slide to everyone for joining us tonight. I've added some information on there. If you need to contact Julie or I regarding the project, our emails are on the screen. And if you would like to stay up to date with all things CRWA, including upcoming events, you can sign up to our River Current using the link in the chat or just straight through our website. You can also learn more about the Charles River Flood Model with the link as well, crwa.org/watershed-model. And feel free to also follow us on social media, where we do share a lot of updates in kind of shorter form formats and registration links. And lastly, once we do close this webinar, you will automatically be taken to a survey on your browser. We highly appreciate you taking the time to fill out that survey so that we can, continue to improve our webinars. And at the bottom of that survey, if you would like to be included in future flood model email invites, you can add that at the bottom of this survey as well. And with that, I'd also like to say thank you to our panels and my colleagues for joining us tonight and helping answer and creating such a really great webinar.
Thank you, Dira, and thank you to our attendees. And thank you, Emily.
Yes, thank you, Emily.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. I hope everyone have a good night.